nuestra gente valiente, a la que canto ahora de la Mercedes de Santa Gertrudes de los demonios. Continuing on our adventure of 1802 to 2022, two French trappers, two Frenchmen with different lifestyles, we will focus on the current trends that are occurring here in the Mora Valley area regarding saving the St. Vrain mill. It was an article that was published in the Green Fire Times, a well-circulated newspaper here in northern New Mexico, regarding this work that is occurring in this area. In the article, it talks about the historical buildings as sites of rich history, importance to the past, present, future continuum of cultural practices and treasures. That is true. Renovating and using these buildings is very inspiring for cultural pride and increasing learning and cultural retention. Renovation of the St. Vrain Mill in Mora is a vital example of historical preservation in motion, so says the author in this article. We move on through a section that talks about a vibrant history here in the valley, and I'll read some excerpts of that particular section that states as follows. The settlement patterns differ sharply from Anglo methods of dividing land into large square parcels. The settlement brought the introduction of a variety of crops that formed a regional diet of cantaloupe, watermelon, and apples were staples, along with the grain produced at the local granaries and mills, the molinos. The first mill built in this area was in 1864 by the infamous Saron St. Vrain, and is now the central focus of this concept today called the Mora Arts and Cultural Compound. The markets declined with the closure of the Fort Union in 1891, and then became a steady flow of homesteading in eastern Mora County in the late 19th century and through the mid-1920s, as families came from Texas and Oklahoma and other regions to claim a stake of 160 acres. We go on and read in this article that it says building restoration. Restoration efforts on the historic St. Vrain Mill are now underway. It includes repairing the collapsed east wall, roof, and windows. Funding has been secured for the phases and is expected to cover restoration through 2018. Planned cultural center activities are addressed in the recent completed Mora Arts and Cultural Compound Cultural Plan. St. Vrain operated this mill through his family until 1922. It is still one of the most impressive structures of Mora. The St. Vrain Mill was added to the National Registry of Historic Places in 1972. It goes on with being an endangered historical place, and that St. Vrain Mill Preservation and Historic Foundation, the stvraiinmill.org, has interest in trying to initiate the goals to purchase the mill, which they did in 2015, and go on. Historical structures report documents of the mill and so forth as the work continues. Participation in this Main Street Art and Cultural District program also continues here in the Mora area. In 2017, the article reads, input was gathered through 2 community meetings and 2 community surveys, one on Mora Arts and Cultural Compound activities, and the other an artist survey. The cultural plan, as it states in this here, envisions the Mora Arts and Cultural Compound creating a multicultural cluster in the arts that will support and capitalize on New Mexico's historical strengths and grow Mora's creative economic sector. 3 strong areas of tourism for the Mora Valley are culture, recreational, and agricultural. The Mora County arts, cultural, and land-based activities to include are the fiestas, arts, crafts, shows, a dinner theater, harvest celebrations, compromised the foundation for this direction in the development of this Mora ACC, the Arts and Cultural Compound. The article closes with moving ahead to where I do not know. But let me rebut this article a little bit to tell you how we feel about this particular item. The history here is beautiful and it is vibrant, but it does not include us in this current article. The Mora land grant was established in 1835 when we were still under the governance of the Mexican government. There is no mention about this history, this vibrant history of how the people survived here in these areas. And I tell you one thing, they didn't survive on cantaloupe and watermelons. They survived on blue cornmeal and other foods, habas, and many other of the traditional foods that are used here. So this writer totally did not know the diet of the people then and doesn't know the diet of the people today. It's very important that we dispel all these misguided concepts of how these areas were seen. Fort Union, as she mentioned in an article, was an important outpost in the Civil War era, but it was also a critical piece in 1852 to continue the suppression of the so-called insurrectionists, the Native Americans and the mestizos and Izaros in these areas. There is no mention of that. And it's really sad to see that when they accentuate this mill, that they talk about the Homestead Act and moving people from Texas and Oklahoma into this area and giving them 160 acres out east of Mora, on the eastern side of Mora. When people from Mora were applying for those 160 acres, they were denied, okay? That's the truth of that story. They were given it to people that were from the dominant culture, coming in and invading the land and taking more than what they already had taken through manifest destiny, the doctrine of discovery. It's really important to note that people here have these small strips, like she mentions in the article, because that's what was left for us. We had to divide that among our families, which were very big. It wasn't because of us not having a lot of land. We had a lot of land. We had 826,000 plus acres in the final aspects of the Mercedes Santa Gertrudis de lo de Mora, the Mora land grant. But as that got taken away from us, Fort Union took some, the timber reserves from Fort Union took some, and many land speculators, to include the Catrins and the Elkins of those times, and people that were also trying to do land grabs in this area, took a lot of the land. And when the people wanted to expand what was left for them, they could not, because they were denied these 160 acres tracts for homestead. So you want to rebuild buildings, okay? Well, my concern is how many permits have been granted for this building? I mean, I currently sit on the Mora County Planning and Zoning Commission, and I can't recall of any permits that are being provided to restoring these buildings. I mean, it's really amazing how people can continue their arrogance and their authority without even going through the proper channels and proper safety requirements to secure a facility for use by the people. It just amazes me that this is considered a functional mill, but this mill was used to oppress the people in this part of the world. We have other mills, such as the Cleveland roller mill, often referred to by the local people as the Cassidy mill, that was very functional but was beneficial to the people here in the 1800s, late 1800s, and providing a lot of good resources to mill their seed for they could put it on the Santa Fe Trail and sell it elsewhere and not for war purposes. We also had the La Cueva mill that also did the same thing. But these folks were doing things much different than what the government was doing and what St. Vrain was doing through the government during his time in operation of that mill. The mill in Cleveland is restored, and it could actually grain if it needed to. well, what is the purpose of a shelled building of St. Vrain when they sold all the milling equipment early on after they closed it, and it doesn't have no function but to perpetuate the things that they're perpetuating, like in this article, racism and discrimination and continued genocide of people's minds, bodies, and spirits, confusing them in their beliefs of what really went on during this time. From there, I think we'll move on to the next article that came into the Green Fire Times called Everyday Green, Cultural Revitalization of the Mora Valley. That article was also in the Green Fire Times on September 5th of 2018. Written by the same person as well. The initial photo of that article shows the Mora Valley as seen from St. Vrain Mill. I think the guy that took the photo didn't know his directions, because in that particular photo, it shows him taking a picture of the valley going towards Guadalupita. The main valley of Mora is from right there by the mill in La Vuelta de los Romeros, as you come into the open area of the valley, clear up to Chacon. But let me read some of these items that are mentioned in this article as well that are misleading and downright, in my opinion, very racist towards the people of the community of Mora. In there it talks about, in New Mexico, staying connected to places while creating a means of livelihood compatible with culture supports both community and environmental stability. More recent success in revitalizing cultural traditions and restoring historic buildings is a New Mexico success story. It goes on to read that the Mora Valley is home to a vibrant history as part of the Hispanic culture in northern New Mexico, culturally rich in language, tradition, arts, santos, retablos, and so on and so forth. They further go on and mention in this article, participation by the Mora communities is an example of what aliveness and spirit can be accomplished here in Mora. During a recent planning process, these concerns were addressed in the creation of the Mora Arts and Cultural Compound Cultural Plan, as we've heard just before. The Mora Arts and Cultural Compound, a condensed area in the heart of the community, consists of a major intersection between two state highways. And it includes this infamous St. Vrain Mill. Many other parts are mentioned, but they're all pretty contemporary facilities. They're not old historical, like this house that we're talking from today. An important goal of this Arts and Cultural Compound, the ACC, is the revitalization of the Mora Plaza, located adjacent to the St. Gertrude's Church. Building and their design hold memories for bridging the past, present, and future of a community. They call it a community-based process, but it seems like it's far from that. The New Mexico Historic Preservation Department and the National Trust of Historic Preservation has given money to this organization. It talks about a cultural future, that the Mora Cultural Compound is part of a network of historical districts and structures in Mora County, forming a cultural landscape, an important setting for linkage related to cultural communities. It closes with, the Mora Valley reflects close connections between church and farming, San Isidro, the patron saint of farming and farm labor, as well as San Juan Bautista, the patron saint of irrigation, continues to be honored in retablos and bultos. So once again, we see an article that once again is really leading people in the wrong direction. I would like to point out several points that I think are critical in this everyday green cultural revitalization. First of all, when they had these meetings, the Mora land grant, as mentioned, was established and given to the people, 76 heirs in 1835. And now, in 2006, prior to all of this, it was re-established and redeveloped because it lay dormant for a number of years because of the oppression and the colonization and the racism that exists that submits people to be submissive in a dominant culture. It's very important to understand that our cultural traditions, whether people think it or not, are alive and well. And that's because we as a people have kept them going. It goes beyond just what was mentioned in this article. It includes music, the true artists of this area that do many types of artwork. It includes language. Many of the people on that cultural compound can't speak a lick of Spanish. They can't even speak a lick of Apache. They can't even speak a lick of any Pueblo language that was discussed and said and people that lived here in those times. It doesn't deal with any of the aspects of Christianity, the blending of two cultures, both the spiritual traditions of the native people with that of the Christian, that you could live in both worlds. And that's how come we have retablos and we have bultos and so forth. It doesn't talk about many of the other aspects that are part of our culture. It just mentions a few, and they usually go to the aspects of cuisine and food. But as mentioned earlier, we ate atole, chaquewe, and we ate habas. I would like to know if those people know what they are and if they've ever eaten them. Because that is the traditional food of the people here, not the stuff that this lady puts in this article. There hasn't been very much participants of people in this community. And if there are participants in this community that acted like Cornelio Vigil or Demasio Vigil, then you know what kind of person we have working with these folks to establish the revitalization of the culture and the people of Mora. These compounds probably are well stacked, these committees, and the ownership. I know that, and I looked at the St. Vrain Mill organization, and the majority of the people on that board, and if it's the same with this board, they're newcomers to this community. There's what some people may even call outsiders from this community. Why haven't they let the lead be taken by people from here? If they truly want to revitalize this culture and build upon it. So we want to make sure that when you read these articles that you're not blinded by them, because we have a lot of people that are not truly establishing what has been happening in this valley for hundreds of years. And you've heard my earlier history about the native people, the mestizo, the Inisaro, that they were here for many, many years. But in these articles, all you hear is Hispanic. Hispanic is a modern day term, a label that has been given to, quote, I guess Spanish-speaking people, but it's not a historical term. You know, they don't mention anything about Mexican, even though this was a Mexican land grant. They don't mention anything about individual land grants that were given to some individuals in this area. All they mention is Spanish. So it's once again an indoctrination for people to be submissive and to be controlled by a dominant culture about what their culture is. This is really critical that we dispel this stuff and reestablish and establish once again with deeper roots our culture here in the Mora Valley. I have written rebuttals to these articles, and I think that one must have to look at those particular rebuttals to make sure that we have covered all of this stuff, because we are being misled. This is like beware of wolves in lamb's clothing. Remember that saying? It comes from, I guess, that Bible that some people read. Oh, and I forgot to mention, these folks, they talk about reestablishing the plaza in Mora. The church, as you recall, was blown up by the U.S. military. It was a Catholic church. You talk about the plaza and rebuilding this and the church. Well, who blew those up to begin with? The original ones. We still had the original church here in Mora. It would be beautiful. We had the original courthouse here in Mora. It'd be nice. They were destroyed by fire. The one the church was blowing up, and subsequently any of the mission churches up the way going up when they were destroying all these villages. You heard the discussion earlier. They were all destroyed. So what's this about? We want to revitalize, we want to reestablish, we want to rebuild. When they were blowing it up, they called it a fort. Now these folks are calling it a plaza. Oh, it's very convenient to twist the wording around to the benefit of those who do not know. When you really start to look at these fundamental aspects of what is going on, it's once again the same racism and discrimination and white privileging that has occurred way back when Saint Vrain was alive, but now he has his emissaries doing his work for him in the modern day time. It's critical to understand that we are trying to change that attitude because we see in America, things are changing all over America. Statues of Confederate leaders are being taken down in many, many states that show this horrific destruction of racism and murder and genocide against people. We also see where they're removing even president statues out of certain cities, like Thomas Jefferson in New York, because he was a slave owner. And yet we still want to build and put this man up on a pedestal here in Mora County. That is very disgraceful. If you're going to leave that building there, I think in some of these letters to the commissioners, and we'll discuss that in a bit as well in length, but you should look at it maybe renaming that building to Manuel Cortez Institute at the St. Vrain Mill in small letters. Saint Vrain is still not dead, but also that Manuel Cortez cannot be found. He's spiritually around. It's the struggle over good over evil.
Mis paisanos, aquí les va otro